Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. So honored and delighted on this episode to be talking with someone who is very well known in the world of comics, and that is creator Steve Englehart. Steve, thank you for jumping in. Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
joining. Yeah, a pleasure to have you here, and I'll mention a couple of titles at the beginning of the episode. I don't think that we have enough time to mention every single title that
Oh
you've
my
worked
God.
on. But we'll mention at least a few here. Of course, you are known as the creator of particular characters like Mantis being one of those, Kilowog with Joe Staten, Dr. Phosphorus, Rupert Thorne. So you are a person who has definitely shaped the world of comics, and you're also a person who writes in the world of prose, I believe, as well. So
Yeah, yeah.
glad to talk through a bit of your creative history today.
Okay.
Yep. So by means of a first question, curious about what connected you to the world of comics as a creator, how you knew that comics were sort of a place that you wanted to begin creating in stories.
Uh, well, I was connected to them as a kid, the way kids are. I mean, I read comics as a kid and mostly was impressed by the artwork, particularly Dick Sprang on Batman. The Batman just looked so different from any other strip of the time.
Hmm.
Um, and then I outgrew comics. And then when I was in college, I got back into them just in time. That was 66. So I was just a few years into the Marvel age at that point and really liked what Marvel was doing. Still thought I might want to be an artist sometime. I worked with Neil Adams as an art assistant, blah, blah, blah. But ended up getting a job on staff at Marvel, and they asked me to write something, and it turned out that I liked writing it, and they liked what I wrote, and so I ended up doing it. So
Hmm.
I just loved comics. I still love comics as a medium. I mean, I like the punchiness of the dialogue. I like the crisp art, um, the black line, everything about comics. Pretty much everything about comics just appeals to me. So I did not think as a child or even as a young adult that that's what I was going to do with my life, but I pursued it and ended up doing it and had a great time.
Love it. Love it. Curious about what it's like to work from comics, and then I also know you've done some writing in television
Right.
and film as well, and then the world of novels with characters like Max August. What's it
Yeah.
like to sort of make those changes?
I always say that writing is writing, and it's like playing baseball. You go to a different park, and the left field fence is farther in, so you have to take that into account, but
Hmm.
you're still playing baseball. Um, there are differences I found in writing prose, having been a comic book writer all my life, working life. I'm not interested in writing scene description. They went to the window and the rain was, that doesn't interest me. I'd rather somebody draw that. I want to
Hmm.
write, I want to write the dialogue. So I did write four novels, and actually a couple more under pseudonyms for people and stuff. But um, prose writing, I mean, I could do it, but it just doesn't interest me as much.
Hmm.
Television is much closer to comics, and I enjoyed television um, more. Comic script and a TV script can be interchanged pretty much. I mean, the format's
Hmm.
different. You got to change the format, but it's the same punchy dialogue, and let somebody else take care of the visuals. So
Yeah,
that's how that works for me.
yeah. I'm
And video
thinking.
games, this says video games sort of the same. I mean, video games, you're obviously creating a puzzle and tricks and stuff, and working with what the capabilities of the programming are. When I was doing it for Atari in '82, the programming capabilities were pretty limited.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Nowadays, of course, they're all $5 million games with voice actors and fabulous, visuals and all that kind of stuff. Um, so, but anyway, when you're doing video games, you do have to kind of like do things to get you to certain points in the
Mhm.
ongoing game thing. But again, punchy dialogue and let somebody else do the visuals. So
Yeah, yeah. Almost a choose your own adventure sort of
yeah,
approach from what I've seen. Yeah.
yeah,
Now I believe it was Nightman, one of the shows that you worked on,
right.
as well as some work in the world of G.I. Joe. Is that right?
Yeah. I did a little animation, GI Joe Extreme.
Hmm, hmm,
Um, I'm drawing a blank on the others, but the live action stuff was Nightman, which was a character I created for comics,
hmm,
uh,
hmm.
and then they sold it to TV. And there was nothing in the original contract that said that I got to work on the TV show, so I had to go sort of audition for my own character.
Oh wow, yeah.
But I passed the audition, so then I got to do that. And the big interesting thing in differences that I learned when I got to TV. Um, I wrote a scene where Nightman and his friend sort of walked out of a building and there was a crowd outside.
Hmm.
And it was explained to me that no, anybody on TV's got to be paid. There is no crowd out there. There's like two guys, you know? So yeah, you got to remember that you got to pay anybody to be part of the visuals on
Oh,
that. So
interesting.
so
Yeah,
you don't do that. But that again, it's like okay, so that's one of the rules of TV. So I'm now write scenes with two people in them rather than a whole bunch. But
yeah.
story doesn't change really.
Yeah, the whole Malibu era was interesting to me, and I was
Mm.
just starting to read comics at that time. It was the late '80s when I started, and then I think Malibu was early '90s if I'm remembering.
93 through 95, basically.
Mhm. Yeah, Nightman was always one of those characters. I think he was my favorite out of that
Good.
entire series. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were having a good time at Malibu. But then Marvel went bankrupt and sort of took the whole industry down with them. And
Hmm.
Malibu had more money, free money than most anybody who wasn't a big company. And so they left, but eventually they did run out of money and they had to be sold. And that was the end of that. Um, but yeah, Malibu was one of the high points in my career, uh, just in terms of how much fun it was to do.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm glad you like Nightman.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to see a return of that character at some point, but I'm sure
Yeah.
it's out there somewhere in um,
Well, I mean,
rights and
the
things.
deal at Malibu was when we created the characters, we said, can we own them? And they said, no, we need to own them, but you can get a percentage of the profits.
Hmm.
And so if Marvel, which now owns it, were to do Nightman, they'd have to like give me a percentage of the money that they made, which A, doesn't appeal to them.
Hmm.
And B, if it did happen, then the guys writing X-Men and Fantastic Four and all those would show up the next day going, we want the same deal.
Right.
So Marvel has put all those characters in a drawer, and apparently they're going to stay there unless Disney decides they want to, do something with them.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
which is disappointing because we did put a lot of energy into those characters, and we're having a good time with them. And the fact that they have not been seen since 1995 is, you know, I mean, when they did the TV show, that was 97, 98, somewhere in there. And Marvel
Hmm.
didn't even put out a comic to go with it.
Yeah.
Um, so the vagaries of business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully someday soon they get wise and open that drawer back up.
I would hope so.
Yeah. So I always like to ask about sort of positive experiences, positive collaborations along the way.
Hmm.
And I'm curious about some of those folks, either Marvel, Malibu, wherever the place in your journey you'd like to sort of visit with that. Um, some of those folks that have been some of the best experiences, and then maybe on the flip side of that, some of the folks that you sort of saw come in as youngsters that are now doing great things in the industry.
Yeah, well, since I wasn't an artist and was a writer,
Hmm.
I was able to do. I could comfortably do a book a week. So I was doing four different titles every month, and this was in that era. All the artists were assigned to you, right? I mean, you didn't go in and say, "I want to work with this guy," which happens a lot today, but that wasn't the way it worked back then.
Hmm.
And so I got to really appreciate, every week I'd get art from a different person, right, for whatever series was coming up that week. Um, and I still love comic book art. And so, I mean, some of the high points, and I'm sure, I mean, most of the time I was very, almost every time I was happy with what was going on. But I
Hmm.
mean, Marshall Rogers and Terry Austin on Batman,
Hmm.
Frank
Hmm.
Brunner on Doctor Strange, Gene Colan on Doctor Strange. Uh, you know, I'm sure I could, Jim Starlin on Master of Kung Fu and
Hmm.
Captain Marvel before that a little bit. I mean, there were plenty of people who were just really good. Um, well, and you asked about people who started. When I was doing the Avengers, George Perez
Hmm.
started on the Avengers. And the great thing about that, I remember, was every month he got visibly better. He
Yeah.
was really into his craft and he was learning it. The early stuff, I mean, the first couple of issues, still kind of feeling his way, a little amateurish here and there, but
Hmm.
he took those edges off really quick, and it was really fun to watch him, um, progress over the course of our collaboration.
Yeah.
But pretty much, I mean, I'm leaving out 5 million people, but
Right.
not because they weren't any good. It's just that they don't come to mind right immediately. But
Yeah.
um, I that was one of the great pleasures of doing comics was, I got to tell my story, but then I got to see how other people interpreted it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm also curious. I always like to ask about the kinds of stories that you're drawn to, the things that really make a plot sort of engaging for you as the writer when you get excited about a project.
Um, I don't know that I have a quick answer for that. I mean, it's somebody asked me once, how do you make your stories so interesting? And I say, well, because I make them interesting. I mean, that's that's kind of the only answer I got for you here. I mean,
Mhm.
when I'm putting together a plot, I'm thinking, as a professional, but I've always felt that I was basically a fan who got a chance to be professional. And I mean, so I became professional. I understand the craft, deadlines, all this stuff, but it's still a question of, would this make me think, boy, this is a fun comic? I mean, because when I
Mhm.
was a fan and I read stuff that was fun, I go, oh, that's good. I like that. And
Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
stuff is just filed away in there. Not that I pull out the same tricks again, but I remember that worked and, that didn't work, and so then I put that to use and got feedback. I mean, when I started again, it was people would write letters on a typewriter and put them in an envelope and stick a stamp on them and take them to the post office. And then a couple days later, we would get them, and then 3 months later, they would be in print if they got chosen to be in the letters column, whatever. But we got, I mean, it was getting feedback, particularly in the beginning. I mean, I remember first couple things I wrote, I was happy with them.
Hmm.
Marvel seemed to be happy with them. But then when the letters started coming in and people would go, yeah, I'm happy with this, like, oh, okay, well, then I'm doing it right. And, it's just stuff that strikes me as an interesting story, and I
Yeah.
don't have a better answer for it than that.
Well, I think that's a great answer. I think that's a great answer, and I love the way you center yourself as a fan in that, and also
Mm,
keeping that audience in mind too. So, yeah,
yeah. Um, yeah. Yep. That's what I do.
yeah. Um, Curious about the things that sort of have your creative attention at the moment, and that could be I've had folks talk about uh, going into continuing comics, creating jazz music, and then
I
some folks talk about what's on their reading table as well.
well, I'm not, I love jazz, but I'm not going to make any of it. Um, no, I did what a lot of people did during the pandemic, which was sit around my house and do something. And what I do is write. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, I wrote things that interested me. Um, again, with the idea that hopefully they would interest other people, but I wasn't thinking I got to sell this. I got to go find. Um, so now that the pandemic period has passed, although the pandemic doesn't seem to have passed from what they keep saying.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, Now I'm looking for artists and figuring on Kickstarters and stuff like that to kind of take that
Fantastic.
stuff forward.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I have there were four different things, um, three of which hopefully will go forward. One of which I would love, but I don't think it will. I had this idea. I wanted to do a story about a small town, and I wanted to have like 20 ongoing characters, each one of them with a story. So there's 20 stories maneuvering through this whole thing.
Hmm.
And then two of those people get superpowers, but you don't know, I don't tell you which two,
Ah, interesting.
right? And so you're continuing to follow the stories of all these people, but two of them have a secret. It's called secret identities, right? It's like
Uh-huh.
two of them have secret identities. Um, I wanted to bury them in that group, and also as a writing exercise, the things you can do when you're sitting around in a pandemic is could I tell 20 stories, all of which are interesting,
Hmm.
you know, that don't all climax at the same time, that don't all, I mean, so that they can interweave and build and make an actual story, which is the professional part of what I was talking about before.
Yeah.
Um, and then, but have this secret identity thing going on too. And so I did that, and I was real happy with myself, that I could do that.
Hmm.
But when I got done with it, only then did I say to myself, this is 7 60-page graphic albums. In order to have 20 ongoing stories, I needed 60 pages.
Hmm.
And to tell the whole thing, it took seven of them. And so that's 420 pages. And, with 20 characters. So
Yeah.
who's going to draw that, right? Um, and George Perez would have drawn it, I bet. And then it was suggested, oh, well, turn it into a Netflix series. But then you got to pay 20 people to be in that series, right? So,
Hmm.
excuse me, I'm coming off a cold. It's not COVID.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um, so it's like this magnum opus that I'm really proud of, but I don't think it will ever be visible to anybody else,
I
Uh,
hope so. I hope so in some way at some point.
I've suggested to people that I could just publish the scripts, and I've been told nobody wants to read scripts, So, um, and it would be a lot of work to turn it into a novel or anything like that. But, maybe.
Yeah,
Um, the other stuff, again, I do have other things, and I'm looking into artists as we speak.
wonderful.
Once I get that done, then I'll look into Kickstarter, which I've never done. But
From
yeah,
what I understand, Ron Randall is the guy. Apparently, he
to do.
kickstarts well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Good to know.
yeah.
Yeah, I've never, again, I come from an era when everything was handled. So the Kickstarter thing, finding the artist thing, that's new to me, but that's cool. I
Yeah.
mean, because again, as it turns out, I am a writer. Um,
Hmm.
Perhaps I would have been an artist if I'd pursued it, but I don't know. but I like telling stories, and just because I'm not doing it for Marvel or DC at this point doesn't mean that I can't do it. So that's what I'm doing.
Fantastic. Well, for what it's worth, I would totally read the scripts as written. I would be interested in that personally, but that's just me. I was also a
Oh,
person that read screenplays in the 90s when they started publishing like the Sling Blade screenplay and stuff like
okay.
that. So,
I'll
yeah.
send them to you if you want.
Well, yes, please.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, yeah, that would be wonderful. Um, yeah, I would love that. But also very excited about the things that you're developing with artists and exploring further as well. So always
Yeah,
glad to talk about those.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, did we miss anything in the interview that you want to make sure to share before we close out?
No, I don't think so.
All right. As I mentioned, I try to keep them brief, so I hope
Yeah,
that works well.
yeah,
And a pleasure to meet you, pleasure to talk with you, and glad to hear that there is more on the way in the world of creating.
yeah. Me too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Steve.
Sure. Bye.